Welcome back to our second season. I'm Monica Olson, host of Serenbe Stories. In our first season, Steve Nygren and I went back to the beginning, both in his life and career and in Serenbe's history, to tell the in-depth story about how this community just outside of Atlanta came to be. This week, and for the next 14, we are launching the second season of Serenbe Stories. Steve and I will welcome many of the people that inspired, encouraged, and influenced how he's built Serenbe over the years. Join us for the second season as we hear their Serenbe stories. Serenbe is a place where people live, work, learn, and play in celebration of life's beauty. And we're here to share the stories that connect residents and guests to each other and to nature. This is Serenbe Stories. In this episode, we interview best-selling author Richard Louv, who talks about his new book, Our Wild Calling, addressing the whisper of nature that's communicating with us all around, how we are desperate to feel not alone, and how wolves may have helped humans survive. He'll also share how dogs look into your eyes in a very special way. But first, Serenbe Stories is brought to you by The Inn at Serenbe. The Inn is nestled in the rolling countryside of bucolic Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. You can relax by the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on wraparound porch. Play on the croquet lawn, swings, and in-ground trampolines. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in luxurious rooms on the inn grounds or within the community of Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com. And now, listen to our conversation with Richard Louv and Steve Nygren. We hope you enjoy. Welcome back, Steve.
Thanks, Monica.
Richard has been a really good friend of Serenbe's for a while. He actually coined the term nature deficit disorder that resonated so deeply with Steve and his family and really validated their decision to move to the farm. Richard also created the nonprofit Children in Nature Network that supports people and organizations working to reconnect children with nature. And Steve has served on their board for many years and was past chair most recently. Welcome, Richard, and thank you for taking the time to share your Serenbe story with us.
Well, thanks.
Well, it's a real thrill and honor to have Rich here today talking about this. I've talked before about how we intuitively realized that nature was making a difference for our children, and that's why after 3 years on the weekends, we moved the entire family down here permanently in 1994. And then several years later, Rich published the book, Last Child in the Woods. And 2 different people sent it to me and somebody else mentioned it. And so I sent Richard Louv at that point, a note and thanked him for giving voice to what I intuitively sort of felt. And so it's just been, the work of Richard Louv is really says so much of what we need to understand. And so he is a giant in my mind on dealing with one of the really social issues that we're dealing with on how we're raising our children and how we're exposing them.
And he's written a couple books since then. After Last Child in the Woods, he wrote
Nature Principle, and he actually talks about Serenbe in that book.
Exactly. And then Vitamin N came out, kind of talking about how it's important for not just kids, but everybody to be connected.
Those are Rich's current books, Monica, but a lot of people do not know about America Too. And Rich, what year was that? Late 70s that you wrote?
83.
83, okay.
That's right. So even though the book was 3 decades ago, it really resonates today. Rich, I think you went around the country talking to people as they moved, really tracking these demographic changes. And you were asking Americans, had they found what they were looking for? And I think that I believe, having read the book, that it was really talking about people who had felt like they had lost control of their social and economic environment. And they were really trying to find a new way forward.
And if you look at that, it's out of print, but I think you can still find it. Rich has really identified a lot of the issues we have today, and even the bigger issue of Serenbe, not only connecting kids with nature, but some of the bigger issues that we're facing as a nation. So I think that's an interesting look back, and it's a more comprehensive look. But he really released a movement with the book Last Child in the Woods, and it touched a need. It's the void that many teachers, parents, camp leaders saw, and they weren't able to put words to it. Very much like I knew we had to move our children out here. I didn't know why. I couldn't explain it to people. And so that's where it started, as a network of these people that saw that void. And now that has really moved into an organization. And I encourage anyone listening to this to go to Children in Nature Network's webpage, because you'll find the research. You'll find the work we're doing with our Natural Leaders program in bringing kids off the streets in these inner cities many times. And it's giving them a position to where they can really find who they are, and then in turn how they can connect with other people in the nature.
Well, and that's a good segue to ask sort of, how did you begin? Before all the books were written, I think you were an investigative journalist. Is that correct?
No, that would make it too highfalutin.
Ooh.
I was a journalist, a reporter, but I was also a newspaper columnist for the San Diego Union Tribune for about 24 years. Okay. And during that time, I wrote some of these books, and then since then, I've only written books and magazine articles. And I was, thanks, Steve, for saying I was a giant in your mind. I'm a giant in my mind, too.
So. And you continue to be in both our minds.
That's right.
Good.
There's not a lot of room in there, so yeah.
It's good that we have agreement in the room. But you're here today not only to sort of be on the podcast, but you are launching your newest book, Our Wild Calling. And before we get to that, which we're very excited about having you talk about that book, I do want to talk and hear from you guys. How did you meet after you sort of sent that first note to Richard? What led? Did you open all your mail at that time, or how did you?
By email, but I don't remember what happened next.
So after I sent Rich that note, I think I got a nice thanks. And then someone from his staff called and suggested I might come to the gathering. Is that what we called them? You called them those days? The networking?
Yeah. Children Nature Network gathering. It wasn't my staff. It was the Children Nature Network, the nonprofit that grew out of Last Child in the Woods.
So clearly it was, one of the people on the nonprofit staff said, a developer. We should invite him. And I remember I came and I saw Rich off in the distance. And at one point they said, why don't you sit next to Rich at lunch? And so that was a big deal to get to talk to him. So it's fun now seeing how our relationship, of course, has progressed through the years. Because
the Children in Nature Network, the foundation, tell us a little about how that came out of the book and where that got created.
When the next to the last chapter in Last Child in the Woods, which was 2005, I imagined a movement to connect kids and their families and their communities to the natural world. That was wishful thinking. Little did I know that people would actually start asking me, okay, what's next? What do we do? And this was on the actual initial book tour for the book. And I was pretty overwhelmed by those questions, and I lucked out, and some really fine people came to my rescue. And the idea of the Children Nature Network was a book is only a snapshot in time. The studies it quotes, the reality it describes. And so we knew that we needed something that would be a place that would continue to collect the incoming studies, the research that was beginning finally to flow about this issue. It had been ignored pretty much by the academic world for a long time. The impact on nature experience on human development, particularly child development, and a place that would be a gathering point for people around the world who cared about this issue. And that's what happened. That was created. And since then, a movement of which Steve is one of the leaders of it has emerged, and it's at all kinds of levels, and Steve represents it at many levels. But I think the fact that Steve is a developer and a community builder, that's enormously important. We can't just do this with programs. We have to change the very fabric of where we live.
Obviously, I agree with that, living here. So we've been here 10 years and our kids have grown up here. So it makes a huge difference. And sort of that placemaking that we talk about is ever important. And Steve, I know that not only you were 2 years for the chair on the foundation, but I know you were instrumental in bringing a couple different people onto the board. Is that correct?
That's correct. In my time, I started attending all the meetings, and then they invited me on the board, and then I've just completed 2 years as the chair. And of course, you're constantly bringing thought leaders onto the board, and it's really incredible the board that now exists for Children in Nature Network. A real diverse leadership group from around the country, various professions, and I think we can be very proud of a diverse board today.
I agree.
And I know that in 2020, you guys are bringing it to Atlanta, which will be sort of a private closed session. But then 2021, in June 3rd through 5th, it'll be here in Atlanta, open to the public. So that'll be really exciting for everybody to be able to attend and come to that and also be part of that nature movement.
That's correct. The gatherings have moved to an annual conference, and we found it was most meaningful to have the conferences in a 2 series. Once we choose a city, then it is a gathering of really the thought leadership that's doing the work so that they can come together. And then the second year in that same city is open to the public, and we extend. And now it's an international conference, and people come from how many countries last time?
Well, the international conference that we held in Vancouver in Canada, there were almost 1,000 people, and they were from, I think, 23 countries, 24 if you count Texas. And it was pretty amazing. This concern is felt all over the world. Anywhere people are urbanizing, that means just about everywhere it is felt.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about some of the solutions that are coming forward out of that conference or that you're seeing since the original book came out.
Well, one of the things is that Children Nature Network is working with the National League of Cities in a partnership to target cities, including Atlanta and other cities, to try to become what I've called nature rich, which means, and that's not a play on my name. My wife pointed that out long after I started working on it. Great. I wish I'd known that. It's not a play on that. But it's all these cities. What does it mean to be a city that is wealthy in nature? What does it mean to be a city in which people are as immersed in nature every day as they are in technology? Can that happen? What does it mean for a city to be an engine of biodiversity, not just the enemy of biodiversity? And to have kids and families really connected in that city, because it's so important, because as of 2008, more people in the world live in cities than in the countryside, first time in human history, and it's going to only increase. So it can't just be going to Yosemite, and it can't be just growing up on a farm, as important as that is. And this is important in rural areas too. It has to be where people live, work, learn, and play. So that has emerged. This is a major effort to convince cities that this can happen and research it over time, and then train future mayors and other municipal officials how to do it in their places where they live. Mm-hmm.
And this newest book, I love, it's connecting not just to nature, but to animals. So how did that evolution come together when it's, how do we connect our kids to nature? We know that, there's a lot of ills that are coming out of, you're basically in these 4 walls. There's no play. There's not getting out. How did the animals come into play? Like, where did that sort of, in your research or interest over the years?
Well, first, one of the positive changes that's occurred is that when I researched and wrote Last Child in the Woods, which was published in 2005, I could find about 60 studies, both of the disconnection, but more importantly, of the benefits of nature psychologically, physically, even spiritually. And now you can go to the Children Nature Network website and go to our research library, which we deliberately built with independently written abstracts of the studies of this. And I don't think we have all of them, but we've got a lot of them. And now it's gone from about 60 studies to approaching, and it's probably over it now, 1,000 studies. Wow. And before that time, before 2005, there were a few pioneers out there like Robin Moore and others who were looking at this, but there wasn't much funding for research. What pill can you sell? And science also has a blind spot about nature. How do you define it? Since that time, though, it's now a growth industry researching the impact of research on human development. When you look at those studies, and I hope people do go there and look at it because this is a real resource if you're going to go to your school board and try to change the schools, for example. When you look at those studies, as I started doing, I can't find many animals in them, particularly wild animals. We know quite a bit about domestic animals because of animal-assisted therapy, which is in this new book. That's a part of Our Wild Calling. But what we don't really know much about is the impact of that coyote that walks through our backyard and gets eye contact with us, and the birds that we live with when we wake up in the morning, and all of that. We don't have a lot of knowledge about how that affects us. Now, clearly, our ancestors long ago knew that not only did they help shape us, we helped shape them, and we told stories about them around campfires. And these stories, in those stories, we found meaning. So the new book, Our Wild Calling, is an effort to look at that and also to relate the stories I've been collecting for years from people about these, life-changing sometimes encounters they have with wild animals, but also the ongoing relationships they have with their companion animals and how that gives their life more meaning. And what can we do with that in the future? I think that's going to play an important role in the future of the Children of Nature movement, is to begin to look at animals and children in animals in education, animal therapy, animal-assisted therapy, but also the meaning of our encounter with a bobcat, the meaning of our encounter with a goat. Children feel that more than adults do early on, and then over time we tend to lose that. We can rediscover it, and I did for myself, and that's probably where the book comes from. That's a long answer, I know.
Do you have any experiences like that, Steve, where you guys have had animals in your life? You've kept animals on the farm here for many years, and I know those beautiful white cows, like you wanted to save them. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, being a farm boy, of course, I grew up with animals. That was just part of life. That wasn't a unique thing. Sometimes, it was a burden to have to take care of. But clearly, the animal world is an important issue. And when we spent the weekends down here initially, it was reconnecting with nature. And so it was that awe at seeing the deer run through the forest with we have the bobtail and the white bobtail. The thrill of the snake and figuring out whether it was poisonous or where you could grab it and show it to the kids. It was a black snake, and understanding that difference, and that really reconnects you with the awe and the wonder, and to walk through the forest and hear the birds. And I'm just amazed at the Audubon Society or some of the residents here who really understand that, and they'll hear the bird, and then they know where to point the binoculars to see that. And many times in our forest, they are able to identify 50 plus birds in a 2 to 3 hour walk, which is incredible. That's for a place that you would consider on the edge of urban. But I think by keeping this area natural and not having chemicals and a lot of things that drive the natural species away from our urban areas, this is very much like a wilderness, and it just makes everything you see come to life in a complete different way.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I don't know if it was a conversation we were having or in the book, about research that says that parks that have a higher number of ecological species.
Yeah, the urban parks that have the highest, the best impact on human psychological health, the people that use those parks are the parks with the highest biodiversity, the most variety and largest number of species. I don't think that's an accident. I think we are desperate not to feel alone in the universe. one of the important things in Serenbe is you're focused in Serenbe not only on having nice views of nature, and not only on the animals and the plants, but of the civility of the human beings who live here with each other and with the other people who live in this neighborhood, the neighborhood of animals. Mm-hmm. And that's extraordinarily important. One of the core themes of Our Wild Calling is the idea or the fact that medical folks are now saying that human loneliness is about to surpass obesity as a cause of early death. It's associated with not just suicide, all kinds of diseases are associated with social isolation. The fact that the parks that have the best psychological impact are the ones with the highest biodiversity isn't an accident. Again, we're desperate not to feel alone in the universe. I think that human loneliness is rooted in an even deeper loneliness, which is species loneliness. Why else would we look for Bigfoot? Why else would we look for life on other planets, particularly intelligent? When Stephen Hawking tells us that may not be a good idea to let them know we're here. We are desperate to feel not alone. And that's some of the source of religion, of course, but I think it is also connected to our sense of increasing isolation from the other life around us. And that has a deep impact on us when we withdraw from our larger family of other animals and plants. And the communication with them, there's a lot of research now on plant communication, tree communication. Mm-hmm. It's all around us. And in the book, I call this the whisper. It's all around us all the time. And, we talk about horse whispers. Horse whispers actually listen. Actually, but the rest of us are listening all the time, even if we don't hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things of being here, that the ability to take a moment and to walk out on a trail, even between, roads that just takes you 2 minutes, can change the way you're feeling. You notice a butterfly, a plant, even a root really makes a huge difference. And we talk about, even in cities, make a friend with your tree that's on your sidewalk in front of your house. But it's a huge difference. And we talk a lot, Steve, about how people come and people wave at each other, and people think that's crazy. Why is everybody waving at me? I don't understand it. I'm a little like, you're looking me in the eye. But by the time they leave, they're waving back at everybody and looking everybody in the eye. And I think what you're saying, that sort of civility and that connection, we want to be seen and we want to be connected. And so it's just one more way to do that. And so I don't know if you...
No, I was going to mention, Rich has just touched on two of the big things that visitors comment on. One is everyone's waving, total strangers. And at first it seems uncomfortable. And isn't that sad? But within 24 hours, they're waving back. And that shows you that need that you identified. And another common thing is they comment on what I call our free-range kids. And you realize how unusual that is to see children 8, 9 years old without parents. And it's a real, indicates something about society that you're really addressing in your books, that we need to be aware of it.
And I would bet some of those kids are with their dogs. And they're, the dog may know where they are, even if the parent doesn't, or the dog does know where they are. It's interesting. We had a conversation earlier today with someone who said they live in New York, and she has noticed when she's walking down the street, there's very little human eye contact, but every dog that approaches her, walks toward her, looks her in the eye. And this has to do with our coevolution with dogs. Now, we co-evolve with each other, but for some reason we have a hard time looking in each other's eyes sometimes. Mm-hmm. But dogs always do it. And there's now known, this is something I write about in the book, is that dogs do what people do with people. Is when we do look each other in the eye for a split second, we first look into the left eye of the other person. Only dogs do that. Wolves don't do that with us, but dogs do. Wolves, gray wolves, all dogs are descended from gray wolves. But dogs have co-evolved with us, co-become with us in a sense. I have the dog that I had when I was a kid. His name was Banner, and a collie. And I have a line in the book that Banner saw me the way that I wanted to be seen, and he expected me to live up to what he saw. And I write in the book about the feeling that Banner taught me some ethics. I mentioned that once to an animal behavioralist years ago, and he said, no way, animals don't. He dismissed that as anthropomorphism and all of that. Well, when I was researching this book with Our Wild Calling, I ran across some research in Germany that explored the idea that we didn't domesticate gray wolves into becoming dogs, throwing the bone outside the campfire and they come closer. That's one way that explains the domestication of gray wolves into dogs. The other way, and it probably happened both ways, is that they domesticated us, that we followed them as pack hunters. We followed them as they followed the herd. We watched how they cooperated with each other, how they had such great families too. And we may have learned how to hunt from wolves, how to survive better by watching them. In that research, in that paper, the researchers actually used the word ethics when they're talking about wolf families.
Wow.
So, I know this is a speculative leap, but I think Banner was teaching me ethics. When he went outside and he hated our cat, but he would stand over our cat and protect that cat from anything. He protected little dogs. This was back in the day in the suburbs when there weren't fences, and dogs ran free. They chased cars, and they had dog fights. And he would protect little dogs from bigger dogs. And he pulled me out of a creek where I went through the ice. He protected a woman up the street when she stepped out the door, and the big bully dog of the neighborhood wanted to attack the Pekingese dog in her arms. And Banner hit him. I was out playing that morning in the front yard. Banner shot up the street, caught that dog in midair. She came down later in tears, thanking us. I don't make fun of Lassie, that show, because my dog, a collie, did some of that.
Yeah.
It is true that I may have romanticized my dog. It is true that memory is tricky. But I found meaning in that, even if I didn't. I don't think I did, but even if I did, ethics values were being transmitted from Banner to me, even if it came mainly from me and the meaning I projected. I think that's true of wild animals as well. I think just as, the early gray wolves and early human beings learned from each other, I think we learn from wild animals as well.
Some say that our dogs reflect our unconscious self. So it's an interesting way to look at it too. That you start
and I don't
really
think
connecting.
it's people. I often get tired of people saying that dogs love us unconditionally. Sorry, they don't. You beat a dog, and that dog will make different decisions.
Yes.
So I think we have to give the dog more credit than that.
Right. Well, we have one resident here that always wants a count to make sure that the dog population at least outnumbers the child population.
Is that right? Well, it does in Toronto. The city planner of Toronto told me that there are more dogs in Toronto than there are kids. And that's one of the evidence of this species loneliness, is that there are now more dogs per capita in North America than there ever have been. And millennials are particularly prone to having dogs, and there's theories as to, delayed childbearing and things like that. But that's evidence that we need other life. We need other creatures. It's not only human beings that we need.
And I think a big part of that is we need to be empathetic, right, with those animals and with each other, which I think is a big thing with the waving. And we're just not listening to each other. And so if the animals can teach us that I think can go a long way in perhaps semi-rectifying what's going on in the world today.
And there is research showing that kids that spend a lot of time with animals, that it helps develop their empathy. And one of the things you look for in serial killers is almost always they tortured animals when they were kids. They were not good animals. So there is, I think, a direct relationship with our sense of empathy. That empathy is also needed to save nature, at least save it for as long as we're around, because it'll do fine after we're gone.
Yeah.
But we have to have that empathy. And if we don't learn to love the animals around us and the plants, we will not care for them.
No. And I think that's a big thing that with all the beauty that we have here at Serenbe, if we can do anything when people come in, and happy to have them come in for a meal or a beautiful home, but if we can start to get them to sort of love nature, see nature as something that's not something to sort of be built upon, but be lived with, I think that's the beginning of everybody being able to save it and care for it. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to share with us, Richard, about next steps on the book? I know it just came out a couple days ago, but any other thoughts?
One thing I want to talk about is this moment that we have that encounter. And we have relationships over time with our companion animals, but that moment of encounter with a wild animal and how it's important to pay attention to that. There are many stories in the book that people tell me, everywhere from an oceanographer has an encounter with an octopus and gets grabbed by the octopus, 12 feet wingspan on that octopus, to, people who have encounters with bobcats and mountain lions, coyotes, all of that, as well as birds. There's a guy teaching people how to learn bird language. But there is something going on there that we need to notice and understand more. And the book's effort really is to understand that moment at its core is what the book is about. Just a brief story. I was on a lake one day in my boat. I have an electric motor. I was there alone on the lake. It was early morning. I saw what I thought were two vultures on the shore eating a dead fish on the shore. And I moved up closer, and I got within about 20 feet with my quiet motor. They weren't vultures. They were two giant golden eagles. And you don't usually get within 20 feet of golden eagles unless they want to be there with you. And one of them flew up, went around a peak, came back down. And for what seemed like a long time, we did this. The eagles would lean down, take a bite of the dead carp, and then look up at me. Direct eye contact. Lean down, get a bite, then look up at me. We did this over and over. It's direct, riveting eye contact. The reason I say it seemed like a long time, and it probably wasn't, is of the stories I've collected, people talk essentially and describe altered states that they go into during these encounters. One of them is time either disappears or bends. Another one is a sense of scale changes radically. Try looking at an anthill for a while. Your sense of scale will change. So it may have been a very short time, but it seemed like a long time to me. And I felt that something happened there. I went home and I told my younger son, Matthew, who is home from college, I said, Matthew, whoever I am, whoever I say I am, I'm not. Whoever I was in those moments is who I actually am. And in those moments with the eagles, I don't have words to describe that. And the reason is it's pre-verbal. It's primal. It's deep within us. I can't speak for the eagles. Maybe they just were trying to figure out if I was edible. But I felt that something happened between me and the eagles. And that's the theme that comes up over and over again with these stories that people tell me from all walks of life, hardcore scientists, teachers, kids, all kinds of people tell these stories, all kinds of animals, and it almost always has that element. Martin Buber, the great intellectual, and I always have to be careful not to say Justin Bieber, wrote an essay quite a while ago. It's called I Am Thou. And it's about the fact that you and I don't really exist, Steve. Not really. What exists is between us. It's the relationship. And he was talking about relationship in a little different way. He thought of it actually as a kind of electricity that some people call God. And he applied that to people. And I don't think that's been applied to our relationship with other animals. And that's kind of became the core idea of our wild calling. And I named it. I like naming things. Mm-hmm. And I think that place between us and another animal in which we feel something shift is, I call it the habitat of the heart. That there are two habitats. There's the physical habitat that many people rightly work so hard to protect. And then there's the habitat of the heart. And we don't work very hard to protect that and nurture it. If one of those habitats goes, so does the other one. Mm-hmm. So I think in environmentalism, in community building, as you've done, you've attended the habitat of the heart here at Serenbe. I think we need to go there. We need to be much more conscious of that place. And one of the characteristics of the habitat of the heart is when you're in it, mm-hmm. when you're having that encounter, and intensely aware of it with another animal, there's absolutely no way to be lonely.
That's beautiful. I think we should leave it on that. That's absolutely profound. Richard, thank you so very, very much.
Thanks so much.
And go out and buy the book. It's already getting all the top 10s in Washington Post, Amazon. AJC covered it yesterday. So I'm so grateful that you're here and you spent this time with us. Thank you so much.
Rich, it's a real honor to have you back at Serenbe. Always fun to show you what's the latest thing at Serenbe.
And thanks, Steve, for what you've done to set an example with Serenbe. And thanks for everything you've done for the Children Nature Network and being chairman, still being on the board. I'm not going to let you get off the board. You know that. Pull you right back in. It's
I'm always there to do whatever you think's important, because you have really, your voice is important. And it was the first voice to really bring focus on a lot of these issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please rate and review the podcast and make sure to email your questions for Steve Nygren to stories@serenbe.com. You may even get to hear them on the podcast. More details about episodes and guests are available on our website, serenbestories.com.